oh my gosh, I don't have to be, or you don't have to be the sage on the stage for everything. You can productively engage people in thinking. And I watched her for those 2 days of a workshop do that routinely. So that was an epiphany that reinforced my intuitions, but I wasn't sure how to do it or if it was even right.
Why Knowledge Matters. Welcome, I'm Yannick, your host, and now joining me, Jay McTighe. Jay McTighe is an educational consultant and an author of several books. It's such a pleasure to have you here on the show, Mr. McTighe. Thank you so much for being part of this.
Happy to join you today.
First and foremost, who is Jay McTighe?
Well, since you asked me to reply in one sentence, here's my best shot. Jay McTighe is a lifelong educator who works toward making education more engaging, purposeful, and thoughtful for the learners, but also for the educator as well.
Wonderful. Give us your defining moment that led you to the path of making a career in education, especially in your youth.
It's a great question. And while I don't think there was a single catalyst, I will describe what was influential. Uh, when I was in college, I was a swimmer. I was a competitive swimmer. In the summer vacations between college, I worked at swimming pools, and I was a swimming instructor, and I taught people to swim from 4 years old up through adults. I also coached a swim team, and I had 85 swimmers from age 5 to 17 in a competitive swim program. So during those years, I came to learn a lot about teaching, about learning, about differentiation, because not all swimmers were equally skilled, comfortable in the water, motivated to learn, etc. And also I learned about motivation and differentiation, if you will, through my swim teaching and my swim coaching. Like many youth, I was in college, but not quite sure what I wanted to do with my life. And there was a principal of a school who lived in my community who had kids on the swim team. And one day he took me aside and said, you know, you are very good working with children, and you are very good motivating them on the swim team, and you're a good teacher. Have you ever considered going into education? And I had not. And he said, well, number one, he said, I think you're a natural. Number two, he said, I would recommend, if you are interested, to consider elementary education because we need more men in that field. So that quite literally was a catalyst for me. My own father, who was a research scientist, had passed away when I was 13. I'm an only child. My mother was supportive of me, but not really directing me in any way toward a major or a career. And in retrospect, I think if my father had lived, he most likely would have encouraged me into a science or engineering kind of track, but I didn't have that influence. So the just this kind of father figure principal who made that observation and made that recommendation was in fact a catalyst for my decision to declare a major in education, and that got me on the track.
That is such a beautiful story, actually. And it also shows that, there are so many paths at times that life can take us, right? But also, when you look back, do you think it was truly what it had to happen? Or do you think that, if your father will be still alive, it will be maybe similar, but you might have embarked on a different path, but you might have the same satisfaction and fulfillment in life?
Impossible to answer. I don't know. I will say, however, from my experience now at 74 years of age, life throws interesting opportunities and challenges at people, and you make your way. Um, Sometimes I meet people who ask me or tell me, gee, I want to do what you do. I want to be a consultant or a writer. And so tell me how I prepare for that. And interestingly, in my career, the only job I had that existed before I got it was my first teaching job, which was fifth grade. Every other job I've had, and there were 7 other jobs, either didn't exist before I got them or I created them. And I say that to kind of reinforce this point. I never had a career goal of being an author or consultant. In fact, I wasn't a particularly good writer in my younger days. Um, but I had opportunities that presented themselves to me to take on new jobs, new roles, new positions, in many cases before I was really, quote, ready. But they presented themselves, I took advantage of it, and I learned a tremendous amount through those different jobs. Um, so even though I'm an advocate for, quote, backward design planning, I didn't apply backward design to my career. I didn't say I want to be a consultant at age 50 and work backward to coordinate efforts to get there. I just did what I thought was the best work I could in the jobs or the roles I had, and other opportunities unfolded for me. So that's just a long way of saying things present themselves in life and you choose how to address them, and opportunities emerge, and sometimes they work out well for you. I've been fortunate. I love what I'm doing. I'm still working actively, but it wasn't a planned career path to get where I am now, in other words.
And this is truly a gift. I mean, to be able to say that with 74 and you still do what you are ultimately, meant to do is, well, I can't imagine like the satisfaction that you have. So how does a ordinary day, with you look like? When do you get up? What's your routine? And how does everything unfold on a daily basis?
Well, I'll preface my answer to just the observation that I had essentially 2 broad tracks in my career. And I'm not sure why the balloons came. I think when I move my hands, it does that. In The first 25 years of my career were working in public education as a teacher, then a resource teacher for gifted programs. I was asked to develop and direct a summer governor's school type enrichment program, a residential program for gifted students in the summers. Uh, then I became a program coordinator for gifted programs in a large school district. Then I made a shift and went to a state ed agency in Maryland, not to be an educational bureaucrat, but to work on a very interesting program, innovative program. I was then brought into the early days of the standards-based movement in the U.S. through Maryland, where we developed not only state standards for subject areas, but created a somewhat revolutionary state assessment program, all built around performance-based assessments, where kids are actually applying their learning as opposed to multiple choice test items. I then went on to direct the Maryland Assessment Consortium, which was helping teachers learn to develop rich, authentic tasks and use them not for grading or evaluation as much as for feedback for students. So I did all of those things over the course of 25 years, working for other people, but in interesting and somewhat innovative roles. Then one of my first major books, the book Understanding by Design, was published. And that, surprising to myself and Grant Wiggins, my co-author, it really took off. So now I'm at a life crossroads where I was getting requests for speaking at conferences, running workshops, being interviewed, but I had a full-time job and I couldn't do both. But I had fortuitously 25 years in a state education retirement system, which gave me the option to take an early retirement. And I made the choice to do that and pursue writing and consulting. So that's the second half of my career, now 28 years. Now, to your question, here is my day currently. I get up at 6:30 or 7. I do a short yoga routine because I'm old and stiff, so you got to keep the muscles moving. And then my days vary, but a general profile of the week would include 2 or 3 webinars, maybe 2 hours each, on various topics, including on teaching for deeper learning. And I do that for schools, districts, including international schools. Um, some writing. Most of my current writing is short form, articles and blog posts. Um, and then preparation of materials for, I have a couple of upcoming in-person conferences, so I work on preparing materials for those. I usually have conversations with a few colleagues on various matters of teaching, learning, and consulting. But then at a personal level, I try to do some exercise every day. Um, I've gotten into pickleball, which is an interesting kind of hobby sport. And for me, learning a new sport at an advanced age is itself a challenge and interesting. There's a social dimension of pickleball, which I've really enjoyed, especially coming off the pandemic where people are isolated. And often people my age tend to be isolated if they're not working or they have, reduced family members, people have passed. So I do that. I also go to a gym and lift weights. Um, so my day is a balance of professional things, personal things, exercise, social through pickleball. And finally, every day I meditate, and I meditate twice a day. The meditation is not spiritual or religious as much as it is a technique to just slow down the mental chatter and get quiet. And I will say, since you asked me, meditation that I've been doing now for 45 years has been one of the most impactful things in my life. A, for reducing stress and just calming down and reducing the mental chatter. But I will say it has brought a mental clarity that has significantly contributed to my professional life. As I mentioned, I was not a great writer early on, but I've come to appreciate that writing is essentially thinking made manifest. So if you work on your thinking, your communication, including writing, will be enhanced. And I can't tell you how many times in the middle of or mostly coming out of a meditation, I'll have these thoughts that would just spark. And typically they reflect something I've been thinking about or working on, but hadn't quite resolved. And I happen to believe that the clarity that comes from quieting the mind allows those thought bubbles to emerge unblocked by all the static. So that was a long answer, but since you asked, I'm giving you a full treatment of my day. Oh, by the way, my wife and I enjoy meals together and usually watch some kind of something on TV for a short time also.
Thank you so much, because this is what really is life all about, right? And having a routine that you just described is truly an inspiration for our viewers and listeners, because we can learn like from someone, because you have been through 74 years. And, why should we not learn from someone as wise as you are? And thank you so much for sharing. But now let's dive into your beautiful book, Teaching for Deeper Learning, Tools to Engage Students in Meaning Making. Wonderful book. I truly recommend to everyone, especially in education, to accelerate, his teaching and the striving of their students. Beautiful book. Thank you so much. So let's start with what made you write the book in the first place.
Well, the short answer is it ties into my life philosophy that you asked me in my first question, trying to make learning engaging, purposeful, and thoughtful for both teachers and students. The larger answer is that this is part of a really a career's quest. One of the first major books I wrote was with Dr. Grant Wiggins, a series of books called Understanding by Design. Understanding by Design is basically a curriculum and assessment planning framework, and it's being used by thousands of teachers around the world, literally around the world. It was the book that launched my writing and consulting career beyond my um, other jobs that I mentioned. So, Understanding by Design we propose that the focus of Understanding by Design, of a modern education, in fact, should be to develop and deepen students' understanding of important ideas and processes, ultimately so they can transfer their learning. I think a modern education should do more than present lots of information and hope students can remember it and use rote learning as the main delivery. A modern education, given the nature of the world, the fact that new opportunities and challenges emerge, the world is unpredictable, as COVID pandemic and the AI phenomena has shown us. And so a modern education should prepare students to be able to navigate new things, even unpredictable things. But you can't transfer something if you don't understand it, right? If all you have is rote learning, all a student can do is give back what was told to them in the way it was told. So the Understanding by Design framework is focusing curriculum and our assessments on teaching and assessing for understanding, building off, of course, basic skills and foundational knowledge, which are the core. But I like to see basic skills and foundational knowledge should be thought of as the floor, not the ceiling of a modern education. We want to build toward understanding and transfer. In our book, and our series of books, by the way, Grant Wiggins and I focused largely on two of three questions. One, what's most worth learning for understanding? What are the big ideas that we want to develop and teach for understanding and transfer within disciplines, and some that cut across disciplines, like critical thinking, with the ability to work well with others in teams? And then the second stage of our quote backward design process is assessment. Here are some questions that we want people to think about. Are we assessing everything that we value the most in education, or mostly the things that are easiest to test and grade or measure? How will we know students really understand and can apply their learning as opposed to remember stuff? How do we make our assessments more like what students will encounter in the real world? The whole idea of authentic or relevant assessment tasks is in that mix. So largely our books on Understanding by Design focused on the nature of the curriculum and what's most worth understanding and how we know that kids understand. But the third stage in what we call backward design is how we teach toward those ends. So Grant Wiggins and I put less emphasis in the third question about how we teach, because we felt there was a great need in education to help people think more carefully about the content they teach and the way they assess learning. Grant Wiggins and I in 2015, were planning our next book, which was going to be on teaching for understanding and transfer, which was getting into that third question. And I was literally had scheduled a trip to his home, which was in Connecticut, where we had each outlined ideas for the book. And then we were going to meet for the weekend and flesh out our outline and start writing. Grant suffered a heart attack the week before our meeting and passed away. It was shocking. It was unexpected. And it put an end to our planned book and to a 25-year friendship and colleagueship. I always wanted to write that book because it would complete the sort of the three-part elements of Understanding by Design. But without Grant, I didn't feel like I could do that. Fortunately, however, I connected with a longtime friend and colleague, Dr. Harvey Silver, And Harvey is literally the most brilliant teacher and developer of instructional materials and tools that I've ever met. And we knew each other for many years, and we've already talked about, hey, we should work together somehow. Well, it was that question that got us united, and I realized that Harvey was just the perfect partner to do what Grant Wiggins and I had envisioned, which was to write a book focusing particularly on teaching that would honor the ideas of understanding by design, but even if a teacher didn't know understanding by design, could benefit. So, again, a very long answer, but it's the history of how the book Teaching for Deeper Learning emerged. I am so thankful for the opportunity to work with Harvey, and we're proud of our book. Now, I can say more about the particulars, but that's how that came to be.
Well, that's a heartwarming story, obviously, and also the passing of your long-term friend. That's obviously very, very hard and must have been a big shock, of course. But that you ultimately find Harvey F. Silver, as your partner, and ultimately were able to put it up and publish it. Uh, Huge. So tell us a little bit the biggest challenges that you both encountered when it comes to collaboration, because teaching also it's a form of collaboration. And how did you manage it that it was effective, and that you could ultimately say that yes, you really truly found a partner that you wanted to write the book.
That's a great question. Just briefly, historically, most of my writing has been co-authorship with another person, and I have found that personally, at least, quite valuable because essentially you're conversing with another person, you're hearing their thoughts, you're giving your own, you're sharpening your thoughts through a collaborative process. You're learning with each other, in other words. So I value that. My partnership with Grant Wiggins, in which we wrote 11 books, uh, featured a unique and important collaborative style where we both often had strong ideas, but both of us were willing to put our egos on the side and fight for the best ideas and the best clarity of those ideas. And that is hugely important. I have occasionally worked with authors who their approach is my way or the highway. They don't want to collaborate. They think their ideas are perfect. They don't take feedback. And I just can't work with someone like that. Grant Wiggins, who is one of the smartest people I've ever met, Harvard PhD, and just a brilliant guy, could very easily, not always happily, but would put his ego on the side when I challenged some of his ideas or his writing, and vice versa. We got to a place where we had enormous professional respect for each other, and we both agreed, even implicitly, that the most important thing was the ideas that emerged, not whose ideas they were or who got to turn the phrase a particular way. When I started working with Harvey, we had the same relationship. He has very good and specific ideas, as do I, but we are able to push each other and argue sometimes for the larger good, which is clarity of ideas for the reader. We're serving the reader and we're serving the larger corpus of the ideas of the book. So challenges um, occur, of course, when you're co-writing, but you get your best ideas out there, and then you give them to an editor, and the editor has another role to play. He or she will come in and say, you repeated yourself here, or I didn't quite follow you there. So both of us would take that feedback also. Now, I'm going to pause, but I'll mention that there are other challenges or obstacles that both Harvey and I have seen that would impact teachers' ability to follow what we've outlined in our book. So if you're interested, I could go there, but I don't want to belabor the answer.
No, please go into that, please, in terms of teachers, and then we come back a little bit about the nature that you have about your collaboration. But please just continue with the teachers and the challenges, and then I have a follow-up question. in terms of collaboration, because I truly believe that collaboration is one of the most critical skills in the world and has always been since the very dawn of humanity. But at the same time, it's also one of the most difficult things actually to do. And that's why I want to know more about why you are such a incredible collaborator, because most people are not. It's extremely difficult. But let's go back and elaborate on the thought that you came up with in terms of teachers.
So the basic idea in teaching for deeper learning is that I like to say understanding must be earned. It must be earned in the mind of the student. I don't believe a teacher can just give a student a big idea that they'll fully and completely understand just by telling them. Here's an example. Correlation does not ensure causality. You can say that to a student, you can have them write it down. That's a big abstract idea that they're not going to immediately comprehend. So understanding must be earned, which means the teacher needs to, in this example, for instance, give kids examples of relationships and have them think about this question. In these relationships, does A cause B, or are they simply just connected somehow, but not in a causal way? And you might give them a variety of examples and non-examples and have them talk about it and ask them to explain why they think A caused B or why they may be related but not causal. So over time, they're building their understanding, but they have to do it. And the teacher's role is to facilitate meaning making. That's what we mean by meaning making. You're constructing and building and sharpening and deepening your understanding. So arguably, this would be a good thing for teaching. Why might some teachers resist or find it difficult? Well, here are a few reasons. Engaging students in meaning making through Socratic questioning, through giving them examples and non-examples, for putting them in groups and having them try to work out a reason or an answer, for having them explain their answers, for having them apply their learning to something new. All of that takes time. One of the pressures that teachers from kindergarten to graduate school face is that typically there's too much content to be taught or laid out in standards or in textbooks, and not enough time to teach it all well. And so there's an enormous pressure, especially in public schools, to cover all the standards or to cover all this important content. But if there's too much content and not enough time, what does a teacher do? Well, you can talk faster in class and you can cover more content, but that's not likely to result in engaged learning that lasts. That's at best superficial learning, and the kids just get overwhelmed. So we have to bite the bullet around the question, what's most worth learning? And not all content is of equal value. There's too much to cover anyway. And by the way, the word cover itself should be revealed or revealing. What does it mean to cover something in a colloquial sense? Well, a bedspread or a tablecloth covers up. It's superficial. It's on the surface. And the more, worrisome meaning of cover is to cover up, as in to conceal or obscure. Grant Wiggins and I have always said our job is not to cover lots of content superficially. It's to uncover the big ideas and the key processes of the disciplines. Take off the veil and go underneath the surface. And to do that means to engage students in active meaning making. But to summarize this challenge, if there's too much content and not enough time to cover it all, and you think your job is to cover it, you're not going to have time to engage students in what it takes for them to make meaning and to earn their understanding. That's a very real challenge. And that's why you can't talk about teaching for deeper learning before first confronting what are our learning goals, which are most important. Do we really believe that understanding and transfer should be our North Star, not superficial coverage? And then that opens the door to teaching using the methods in the book. The second big challenge that many teachers face, especially again in public schools, are the pressures of standardized tests. Standardized accountability tests can have a gripping effect on many teachers, especially in those in the tested grade areas, because the test results are high stakes. They're published in the papers. Schools are rated accordingly. Real estate values are influenced by how well schools score on tests, and teachers are pressured to get the scores up. Since, however, most standardized tests, at least in the US, are based on selected response test items, multiple choice, there's a, I think, misconception, but understandable belief that if standardized tests are important, if this is how schools and teachers are measured, we got to get the scores up. So that means we have to do a lot of practice testing using multiple choice tests. But multiple choice tests and test items are well suited for assessing student knowledge of basic information. You know it or you don't. You can test that very easily. And they can also be used to test very basic skills. And those are needed, they're foundational. But multiple choice tests are not appropriate measures of things we value most. Do you really understand, and can you explain it in your own words? Can you solve a messy problem that involves multiple steps and reasoning, and can you explain your reasoning? Can you write to formulate and support an argument? Can you communicate orally? Can you work well with teams? Can you use design thinking to create a new product? All of these valued outcomes are not susceptible to multiple choice test items. They don't assess those well. However, because the standardized tests are multiple choice in nature, they tend to influence teacher developed and school developed tests, often mimicking the form of the standardized test, sometimes with the belief that, well, if the standardized tests use multiple choice, that's all that we should use because that's how we're being judged. My contention is that's a misunderstanding. And I won't, unless you want, I won't go into all the details on why I made that statement, but I will say standardized tests are hugely influential in many schools and for many teachers. And if you're only mimicking this form of state or standardized tests, you're not answering my second question posed earlier. How do we know students really understand and can apply their learning? So that's another barrier to teaching for deeper learning. Teachers may say, with all good intentions, I'd like to do more of this kind of teaching, but I can't because we have standardized tests and all they're measuring are low-level items often, or that's the perception. The third factor, I'll try to keep this brief, is that when you're engaging students in meaning making as a teacher, you're turning over the learning more to the students. You and your listeners and viewers may have heard the long-standing phrase, the distinction between the teacher as sage on the stage, presenting content, material, new information to students, and the guide on the side. Well, I don't think it's either or. There's clearly a place for direct instruction, modeling, teacher is expert. But if we want to engage students in meaning making, we got to get off the stage and turn into the facilitator of learning, the guide on the side, by posing questions and letting the kids talk, by putting kids in group and letting them debate, by giving them messy problems and letting them try to navigate through, with the teacher providing tips as appropriate. But many teachers, some teachers I should say, are uncomfortable in that role. They're comfortable being the sage on the stage, being in charge. They're uncomfortable giving over that opportunity to students. In some cases, the students are not equipped for it because many cases, as you go up the grades, kids get into the mindset that their job is to sit back. They're going to be told what to do every step of the way. The teacher's going to be the presenter. Their job is to listen or avert their eyes if a question is asked. And so in some cases, you're changing that mindset. You're saying to the student, no, your job is to be active. Your job is to talk and ask questions. And some kids are uncomfortable with that. Finally, there's a control issue. When you put kids in groups and let them talk, they may not always be on task. And so for understandable reasons, these are the barriers that may prevent more use of the methods described in our book. So, again, not to belabor all the bad things, the good things, in my experience, are once you engage students in more active meaning making, putting them more in control, or at least giving them more opportunities to be active in their learning, often behavior problems drop because the kids aren't bored, the kids aren't distracted, they're engaged, and learning is deepened.
When did you realize that meaning making is so important in order for deeper learning? When was it this epiphany, or was it like at some point where you just realized, hey, that's something that I have to explore deeper?
In my very early years of teaching, I had an intuitive inclination, if you will, that students needed to be doing more of the the learning and the talking. In fact, my friend Harvey Silver, one of his aphorisms is, "Who's ever doing the talking is doing the learning." And so, even as a beginning teacher, I would have kids in groups, albeit crude. I didn't really understand cooperative learning. I just said, "Talk to your partner," or "We're going to do this in a group," and I thought that was beneficial. Um, and I wanted to engage kids in thinking. And I remember early in my career, I read a book by Edward de Bono called Lateral Thinking, and he had these thought experiment exercises in the book, and I would occasionally present my kids with them, such as, what if all cars were painted yellow? Or design an exercise machine for a home pet. And I watched them, and they would get engaged, and even some of the quote lower level students who were behind grade level in skills were sometimes some of the best thinkers. So very early on, intuitively, I felt there was some benefit to that kind of teaching and learning. But if there was something of an epiphany, I actually remember it in my early years of teaching. In my fourth year, in fact, I went to a workshop with a woman named Dr. Sandra Kaplan, who was a national leader in gifted education at the time. And my experiences with courses in university and workshops in teaching were almost always, I was a passive observer. Some expert was lecturing and telling us stuff, and I was taking notes. Sandra Kaplan was the first person that set up a workshop where she posed questions, told us to think about them and jot down our thoughts for a few minutes, and then stand up and go find a group and listen to each other. And that, Yannick, was an epiphany for me. It was like, oh my gosh, I don't have to be, or you don't have to be the sage on the stage for everything. You can productively engage people in thinking. And I watched her for those 2 days of a workshop do that routinely. So that was an epiphany that reinforced my intuitions, but I wasn't sure how to do it or if it was even right. And today it is the crux of my belief about teaching and learning.
It's brilliant because you describe all these different steps for precisely what you just said, and what it just does, with predicting and so on, is this active meaning making, right? To trying to connect the dots, whether it's right or not, but it just subconsciously, also consciously, it prepares you for the content, right? If it's just like a question, as you just said, or just a topic, right? So it really helps people actually, make meaning. So it's so powerful.
Well, agreed. And so the book is organized around very specific teaching techniques with associated tools to help the teacher be more of a sage on this, a guide on the side, sorry, and facilitate student meaning making. And also, the tools can be used by the students to help them think and make meaning. Permit me to give you a very specific example. We have a set of what we call 7 categories of ways of thinking with associated tools in the book. And it's our contention that meaning making involves activating student knowledge and experience, while confronting new ideas or new information, and we make meaning through active thinking processes. And so these skills and processes are the vehicle for meaning making, and the tools support them. So here's a quick example verbally. Argumentation, the ability to construct, support, as well as argument and rebut opposing positions, is to me an important skill set to be developed in schools. And interestingly, that outcome, argumentation, is found, at least in the US, in English language arts, mathematics, science, and social studies standards. So arguably, that's a big one. And it works in life. So to help kids develop and deepen their understanding of what argumentation is, one of our tools in the book is a quote argumentation table. It's a graphic organizer. So a picture a box that's like a tabletop, 4 legs, and little claw feet at the end of the legs. And the organizer is meant to visibly show students the elements of an argument. So the elements of an argument, you need to have a claim or a position that's clearly stated. You need to support your claim with reasons, and you need to base your reasons on sound and appropriate evidence. So the table presents a graphic representation. The tabletop is your claim. The legs are the reasons that support your claim, and they are grounded. The feet of the table are evidence. And the image is straightforward. If you don't have good reasons or evidence, you can't support your tabletop. Now, that takes an abstract idea of argumentation and puts it into a tangible form. Then you present students. Maybe you give them an argument and reasons and evidence that someone else has put forth. Put those in the table and see if they hold up. So you can analyze an argument, which is part of the standard. Then when students are creating their arguments for something, they use the graphic as a brainstorming tool, a draft tool, and then they can exchange and critique each other. Or they could look at someone else's argument and critique it, because a good argument is not just making your own case, it's poking holes in opposition positions, right? And then you give kids opportunities to build and support arguments. And one of the ways we engage students when appropriate is to give them some choice, right? So maybe you give them, here are 5 issues. You pick one that's most interesting for you to research, analyze, and come up with your own position and try to support it. Or maybe you let the kid put forth an idea. And so bringing in student choice often engages students because choice matters. They can pick something that's of interest to them or relevant in their world. So that's just an illustration of an example of a thinking skill process that's tied to important outcomes in the standards and a tool that helps teachers and students learn those things. Last quick example. For younger children, we have an alternative. It's an argument stool. It's a stool with a base with 3 legs, no feet. So when you're beginning argumentation, which you should with young kids, you say, if you want someone to believe you or you want to convince somebody to do something, you need to clearly state what you want or what you want them to do or believe, and then you need to support it with reason. So let's build our argumentation stool. So that's an example.
That's brilliant, because it also makes your life so much easier because you're more easily understood by others, right? And so you decrease the likelihood of misunderstandings, conflict, and all those kind of things. So it's really brilliant, and thank you so much for your work. Now, how has your work influenced the way you live, especially your quality of life?
The 2 big ideas in the work that's been most associated with my career, understanding by design, of which the book you're referencing today is a subset, is the two big ideas are in the title: focus on understanding, as I've mentioned, but also use something that we call backward design. It's not a new idea, not original by any means to Grant Wiggins and I, but it's proven to be a useful idea, and now I live by it. Backward design, the way we've described it, involves three stages, and you can use this for planning anything. Stage one is identify your goals or desired results. And in UBD, we say results for learning should be more than just teach kids acquiring basic facts and skills. It should be building understanding and transfer. So all of those are desired results for learning. Stage two of backward design asks a straightforward question. If these are the learning goals or our desired results, what evidence will show us that students have attained those results or that we've achieved our goals? So stage two is thinking like an assessor. Stage three is for teachers. This is where we develop our learning plan. This is where daily lessons are built. This is where our resources are chosen. And we map out what we're going to do Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Traditional teacher planning, day-to-day planning, is in stage three, but our best plans are based on clarity about our short and long-term goals with awareness of the evidence we need to see if that's working. That's backward design. It's now, for me, a way of thinking. When I'm working on a personal project or I'm involved with a community organization, for instance, I invoke that way of thinking, even if people don't know it. So somebody will say, here's what we want to do, and they'll start planning a set of actions. And I'll say, before we jump to our action plan, can you describe your goal through one or more questions? Because you know what you want, but the people we have to work with need to understand why we want to do this. And secondly, can we agree on what success will look like if we pass this law or we adjust our curriculum in this way? And so, if anything, backward design slows people down from wanting to rush to action or jump to solution before thoughtfully considering clarity about our goals and thinking about what success will look like. So that's a long answer to your question. I use backward design in my own life for almost everything, and it's just a way of thinking.
Well, I think it's the best way actually to live and designing also your life. If you start with, okay, what is it, what I want to do, what kind of value do I want to live, what kind of impact I want to, have, and what kind of contribution I want to have, at the end, right? And then you look at, okay, well, how do I assess it, right? How do I see if I'm on the right path in my life? And then ultimately, you you decide how to actually go about, right? So it is fantastic. It's truly, and this is why I find your work is so powerful, because it helps as much teachers, parents, but also the ordinary folk who want to truly live an extraordinary life. And one of the big challenges I find in our life is, we go, for example, swimming. We have a swim coach, right, that teaches us how to swim. We have a hockey coach. We have a reading coach. We have all kind of coaches, right? But no one in our lives tells us how to actually also live life, right? And you are truly a testimony, and that's why I'm so grateful actually talking to you, that we can actually also learn how to truly live and cherish and striving, in our lives, because this is always, we always look at the peak, right? We look at the successes of whatever is swimming or whatever, but what really life is always between the peaks, right? And so by designing something like you just mentioned, then everything just gets easier, right? You start really embracing whatever you face, because you know that you have a vision, and you won't be as easily cut up with stuff that don't matter in your life.
Well said.
So how have you planned with your wife, for example, your life? Have you draw specifically on these skills? Obviously you have, but how has it impacted your relationship with your loved ones, for example, your wife or children or friends?
Well, I don't set out with a planning template to chart my life, even as I recommend that for curriculum. But as I mentioned, it's a way of thinking. And so as I think about my life and I interact with my loved ones, I'll sometimes use questions just to provoke thinking and conversation. Or I'll think about, if we make a decision to go on this vacation or make this major purchase, you know, what will be success? How will we know that this was a good move or a good purchase? Um, so it's pretty informal, but guided by the framework I just laid out. And
What
I
are
don't. I must say I don't do it all the time. In some cases, I pay for it when I don't use that approach.
what are some of your major project that you have in mind and you want to embark in the next, 5 to 10 years?
The two, one major and one maybe minor, is I have a commitment to myself and my sadly deceased partner to finish writing the third edition of the book Understanding by Design. The first edition was published in 1997. The second edition in 2005. It's still being widely used in university courses and purchased by teachers, but it is outdated. The key ideas are not outdated, but there's a lot that's happened since 2005 that impacts education. So that is a major uh, target for my writing. And it's probably the last big book I intend to write, but I need to work on that. On a personal level, I'm actually building out a curriculum for pickleball, for how people can learn and get better at pickleball. And even though some people might think of it as kind of a trivial game, which it is, interestingly, there's a huge continuum from beginner to advanced player, and a lot of skills, strategies, etc., that go into getting better. And in trying to learn and get better at the game, I've attended clinics and drill sessions and watched different people teach, and think that I have the lifetime of experience to contribute to this. So I'm working on that on the side.
Beautiful. What makes you feel alive?
Four things: exercise, physically and mentally. It has a mental relaxation effect. Meditation, which has a mental effect, but it flows through physically. I feel better. Um, Life experiences that are new, like travel, and interacting with my kids and my grandkids.
Your single most important advice to live a meaningful, purposeful, and fulfilled life?
Uh, I actually wrestled with this question when I remember graduating from college, and now, almost for the first time, I'm completely on my own. People aren't telling me what to do other than I was trying to get a job. And so I was in that pondering phase of life, trying to think, well, what is my life? What is my purpose? What do I hope to achieve? Not in terms of career so much, but more generally in life. And early in my early 20s, I came up with two ideas which have stuck with me. Number one, do something that's going to help make the world a better place in some way. And two, have interesting, rich life experiences. I've tried to live my life by those two maxims, and that's what I would offer to others. Not rocket science, but a good course, I'd say.
Beautiful, beautiful. Mr. Jay McTighe, thank you so much for being on the show and being truly a gift to myself and really to the world.
It's been my pleasure, and I appreciate your wonderful questions that were both career related, professionally related, but also personal, and the fusion of those is very interesting. So thanks for those.
Mr. Jay McTighe. That's why knowledge matters. Make your life a masterpiece. Visit now programs.d-ykm.com.